Welcome to Adventures of the Awakening Heart, where we explore the heart in all its forms, physical, energetic, and spiritual, and allow it to reveal its mysterious truths and infinite wisdom. Today, we're focused on the physical heart, what makes it sick and what allows it to recover. And I'll be discussing these issues with Stephen Hussey, a chiropractic doctor based in the US. At age 9, Stephen developed type 1 diabetes. And given that this condition increases risk of other diseases, including heart disease, as he got older and with his subsequent chiropractic training, he began investigating an optimal lifestyle for preventing heart disease for himself and others. And he even wrote a book. However, that was all before a fateful day around 3 years ago in January 2021, when he suffered a very serious heart attack at the age of just 34. This type of heart attack, what's known as an ST elevation myocardial infarction, or STEMI, when it occurs in the left anterior descending coronary artery, as Stephen's did, is known as a widowmaker, as only 12% of those who experience them outside a hospital setting will survive. Thankfully, Stephen did live to tell the tale and has used what must have been a terrifying experience to learn even more about the heart, to rework his original book, which I've got here, Understanding the Heart, and through his book and other work, he's now educating people on the many myths and misunderstandings that still prevail when it comes to heart disease. So welcome, Stephen. Nice to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. Happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
It's a real pleasure. I'm so grateful you're here because, as I said, there's still so many myths and misunderstandings that prevail when it comes to heart disease. And we are in the midst of a time when heart disease rates and heart conditions seem to be on the rise again. And so the information that you can share with us about your own experience, of course, and all the deep research you've done is going to be incredibly valuable. So I love your book, as I think you know. And there's a number of reasons for this. First of all, yes, it's based on lots of your research that has gone on over decades, but also your own personal direct experience. What I really love is how you're not afraid to challenge the conventional thinking, not just around heart disease and what causes it and what helps with it, but also how the heart works itself. And, you know, there have been, it has been for so long, that, this idea that the heart works as a blood pump. But there've always been flaws in this theory, and it seems that finally people are beginning to question that. And so you're covering that in your book, which I think is brilliant. The other thing that I really love about your book, probably more than anything else, is that it's very holistic, and you're very clear that supporting the heart and preventing heart disease isn't just about one thing. It's not just about nutrition. It's not just about the type of movement and exercise we do, but it covers a much broader range of things. So, you know, it's brilliant that you're very holistic. And if you don't mind me just dropping in here. So in terms of when I'm supporting people with their health, I use a model that I developed quite a long time ago now called the 7 elements of healing, because I believe with health, it does actually just come down to 7 things, which is good nutrition, detoxification, making sure our detox pathways are working well, physical activity and movement, rest and relaxation, bioenergetic balance, so the energy balance within our systems in relation to what's going on in the energies outside of our body, emotional well-being, and then the final one, deep connection, or you could call this spiritual connection. So it seems like you've covered pretty much all of those in your book. So we may not have time to discuss them all today because there's a lot,
Hmm.
but hopefully we'll touch on most of them. But to start, what I really wanted to do is just to go back to that, what, as I said earlier, must have been a terrifying day for you, and it isn't long ago. It's only 3 years ago. Um, Obviously, you go into some depth in the story in your book, but it must have been, sort of once you got over the initial fear and you were being looked after in the hospital, um, it must have started to go through your mind, oh my goodness, I've done all this research. I've been thinking about these issues. It sounded like almost since you were, um, a child almost, or a very young adult. Um, and you'd made lots of changes in your diet along the way. I think you'd been a vegan at one point, and you'd changed completely from that. So you'd done lots of work with your diet and lifestyle, and yet there you were, lying in the hospital, having had a very serious heart attack. Did it did it get you questioning everything you'd done? And particularly when the consultants and the doctors were telling you, oh, the reason you've had this heart attack is because your LDL cholesterol is high, which is something that you weren't convinced by. But in those first moments when you must have been scared, it must have thrown everything that you knew up in the air, and you must have been questioning it all. So what was that like in those very early stages?
Yeah, it was, I mean, the event itself disheartening, after the fact, after it was like, this like go get help mode, like make this go away, survive kind of thing. After the fact, it was very disheartening, and I felt like a failure, so to speak. And I wasn't allowed to have any visitors because it was during COVID, so it was just me in the hospital. And so yeah, I don't, maybe I questioned myself personally, as far as like thinking I wasn't doing enough or there's something that I missed. I didn't question the research though, because that's not based on me. Those aren't my ideas. There's literally thousands of authors listed on the research articles, and I think in my book I think there's like 700 citations. So it's hard for one event that happens to just do away with all of that evidence. So like that's kind of how my brain works. Was I wondering why this happened, and what situation I got myself in that allowed to happen? Yes, obviously. And thinking there was something I missed, yes. But when I saw, you know the care that I received, or not even the care I received, the care was fine. Obviously, the first part of the care saved my life, but like after the fact, the thinking that they used in order to, dictate what their protocol was with someone like me was very um lacking, I guess, lacking in knowledge as far as what evidence is actually out there, and lacking in understanding of the actual causes of heart disease. It's
Can I
it's very
sorry,
yes. Go ahead.
I don't want to interrupt you, but one of the things that I'm thinking of as you're saying that is, because I think they told you that that they would put it down to or certainly in part, your high LDL cholesterol, but at the same time, I think they told you that you didn't have a buildup of plaque in your arteries.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that sort
So
of doesn't fit for a start, does it?
yeah, for sure. I mean, when they went in to do, to bust the clot and place the stent, um, there was no atherosclerosis anywhere. There was just a clot that formed,
Mm,
um, big enough to block the entire artery. So a very acute situation. And I had a coronary artery calcium score done 6 months prior, which is a measure of how much calcified plaque. It doesn't measure how much soft plaque, but again, when they went in, they found no soft plaque.
yeah.
And my CAC score was zero. The 6 months prior. So yeah, them telling me, oh, it's your cholesterol, just tells me that they had a cookie cutter recipe way of viewing
Mm,
things.
Yeah.
And that's what they said. And so, but I'm very aware of the shortcomings of Western medicine. Yes, it's amazing in an emergency, life-threatening situation. Emergency room is the best place to be.
Mm.
Um, you know, their views on chronic disease and why it happens and how to address it are very, very lacking in understanding. But I also understand that it is a system. It is a system for profit. It's a business, just like anything else. And so the
Mm.
individuals within that system are not evil. They've been taught a certain way of thinking, and
Mm.
they're just trying to do their job. And it's frustrating when they can't, or when someone disagrees with the way they do their job, just like any of us would be if someone came into our workplace and started saying, why do you do it this way? Why do you do it that way? We would all be that way. But I
Yeah.
understand that this system is set up to make a profit. And quite frankly, there's a conflict of interest in that sick people make them a profit.
Mm.
Healing someone makes them less profit. And there are people that out there that feel that that's nefarious and that there are nefarious people maintaining that. And I can agree with them on that. But there's also people that choose to think that that's just the process of a capitalist society.
Mm.
And so, Upton Sinclair said that it's hard to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it. And so when the profit of a system benefits from an understanding of something like an idea that cholesterol causes heart disease, it's very hard to get that system or the people within that system who are all moving toward the profit of that system to understand that that theory has no evidence behind it whatsoever. And that theory itself, the main proof, is treating that theory, treating cholesterol with aggressive statin or cholesterol lowering medications, which are, widely prescribed, especially in Western society, is not having an effect on heart disease. So if it
Mm.
was the answer, you'd think that
Mm.
fixing the answer, so to speak, would result in less heart disease, and it's not.
Yes.
So that's the main observation there. That's just kind of common sense logic. Like there must be
Mm.
something else. There must be something that we're missing. And
Mm.
in my experience, like I'm not here to say that what I wrote in the book is absolutely 100% correct or that I know it to be correct. It's theories and it's ideas that hopefully push us further toward the actual truth, which hopefully lots of the things I say in the book are actual truth. But the idea is to open the conversation.
Mm.
And that was the issue in the hospital, is that I'm sitting there and I'm asking these questions based on the research that I've done, and they're shutting down the conversation. They don't want to
Mm.
hear it. They just want me to listen to them, do what they say, and they're telling me this is the only way that I will recover, which I didn't do pretty much anything what they said, and I still recovered more beautifully than they expected. But that's just it's opening the conversation. If we don't open the conversation, we'll never get any closer to figuring out what does cause heart disease and how we actually fix it.
The trouble is that you obviously had a lot of knowledge before, and you were coming into that situation already having, done a lot of research, and you were brave enough because even if you do have the knowledge, when you're not well, sometimes you
Mm,
you don't have the sort of wherewithal to question, particularly when you're meeting hostility and they're trying to shut down the conversation, like you say. But you persevered and you did challenge them and you did ask questions, and good for you. It's very difficult though for people who go into that setting, even if they are aware that perhaps what they're being told isn't based on some of the most up-to-date research, to challenge doctors in that situation when you're not well. It's difficult, isn't it?
it is, yeah. And you know, again, it's they have their way of thinking, and I had a different way of thinking, and I was not being combative. At least at first. And I was never really combative at all, but I did get a little more defensive whenever, because at first I was just like asking them their information. I mean, I get it. I just had a heart attack. I wanted their opinion.
Mhm.
Like they're the ones that see this day in and day out. They see people come in with heart attacks. And so I wanted their information because I want all the information so that I can make the best decision for me going forward. Um,
Mm.
and so I kept asking their opinions about things, or like, and I guess I would question what they would say too. Like I would say, what about this or what about that? Or that's been shown to cause this. And I wasn't disagreeing with him. I was just saying, I want your opinion on that, but they got defensive first, or they would get very uncomfortable. Or a couple of different doctors said that I'm not going to have this conversation with you because I don't want to, or I don't know enough about it, which fine. If you don't know, that's a perfectly fine thing to say. You know, admitting you don't know much about it or whatever. But again, it was just like the shutdown of conversation, and just you could sense that they didn't have time to have a conversation.
Mm, that's a
They were,
big part of it, isn't it?
yeah. And so,
Mm.
but then later, I got my notes, my chart notes from the hospital, and it was like they definitely branded me as um uh uncompliant patient. And so because it was different doctors that came in, and every doctor that came in, depending on the shift it was, would see that in the note and be like, oh, great, this guy is something. So it's just like they branded me as that, and I was just like, okay. So, it's just like, it's not to say these people were bad or anything like that. It's just to say that the system is not working. Like, it's great in the emergency room, but then as soon as you leave it, as soon as
Mm,
they save your life, they stabilize you, the recommendations for what they say going forward, which I was
mm,
told a lot of things that are untrue based on the literature,
mhm,
from
mm.
doctors, from different like cardiac rehab nurses, nutritionists that came in. Like, she basically told me a diet that contributes to heart disease based on the literature. Um, and she
Yeah,
was
you talk
totally
about
unaware
that
of
in the
it.
book.
Yeah, she was
Mm,
totally unaware of that fact. She was just like, "This is what I'm told to tell you to do."
yeah, yeah.
So and no one's really, everybody's just trying to do their job, and I get it. They're trying to do their job so they can make money, so they can support their families, and that's what they're doing. And so that someone comes in and disrupts that, or ability to do their job, or questions it, it's just like, stop trying to make my day difficult. Like, I get
Yeah.
that. That's the system that we're up against. This thing that's kind of solidified itself
Mm,
in that. So
mm,
I understand all that, but at the same time, the information that I had, the reason that I went forward with publishing the book after I wrote the introduction and told about my experience and stuff, which I almost feel like I was fortunate enough to be able to do that. I hadn't released it just yet. I was
mm.
able to use that as an introduction. Um, then then that information needs to get out there so that people can make educated decisions. Because what I was in the hospital realizing was that I'm here and I know this information, and it's helping me make these decisions, even though I'm listening to what they say and kind of combining what they say to other things. Um, Other people don't have that information.
Mm,
And
mm.
so how are you supposed to make an educated decision when you don't have all the information? And so that's where people are today, is that they can't make an educated decision about their health because they don't have all the information. They just have one viewpoint or one,
Yeah,
list of things. And so that's what my purpose is now, I feel like,
yeah,
is just spreading
yeah.
information.
And when people read your book, I think one of the things that, you know, will leave people incredulous, and it still does me really, is just how we've come so far with the whole diet heart hypothesis, which talks about cholesterol as the thing that clogs up our arteries. How have we got so far? This theory was sort of really developed in the 1950s, and it sort of took hold after that, and it's still, what doctors will talk about. It's still what's mentioned in the textbooks, um, and yet, like you say, the evidence, well, there's always been flaws in that theory.
Mhm.
Um, and there were many people shouting about that right in the early days, but it just seemed to take off, and it seemed, like you say, money was part of the story again. But it seems quite incredible that still in 2024, that's still the mainstream thinking when there are so many holes in that theory. How do you think we're still in a position where, you know, I mean, I think that a lot of people, health practitioners, will tell you that cholesterol and saturated fats actually stick to the artery wall,
Mhm.
which
Mhm.
is really not the case, because these plaques actually form within the artery wall. So that it just doesn't fit. But how do you think we've come so far, and still there's that sort of misunderstanding going on here?
Yeah, well, I mean, the answer is that there's a system keeping it in place. And again, it goes back to what Sinclair said. It's very hard to get, whether it's a man or a system, to understand something when their success, their salary, their livelihood depends on them not understanding it.
Mm,
And it's so ingrained in this system. So you have to look at some of the things that happen. So one is that there's a standard of care that's established throughout medicine. And that standard of care says that if someone's cholesterol is high, you have to recommend a statin drug. If you don't, and something happens to them, you are liable, which is a fear-based thing for the physician, which, lots of people, most people probably wouldn't sue a physician for lacking to suggest a drug if something happened to them. But that's one thing that is established in the system, like the standard of care. You have to do a standard of care, and if something happens, you get sued, and a group of your peers say that you didn't follow the standard of care, you're liable, right? So that's one thing that sets that system up. Secondly, is that there's a lot of influence over the medical education and the medical research that is being done in a lot of our top institutions. And this is very well documented. And the actual, one of the editors for the New England Journal of Medicine, Marcia Engel, wrote a book after she retired saying that it's hard to trust any research now because of the influence of industry on the research. They pay scientists to investigate something and they want a result from that investigation. And so the scientists figure out how to skew the statistics or design the study in a way that gives them the result that they want, so they can make their money, and so there's just things that set it up like that. I mean, there's influence over the medical schools, and this goes back all the way to the Rockefellers and their influence over medicine, and way back in the day, early 1900s, that is still holds true today. Or just the fact that pharmaceutical companies, like they funded the committee that decided that cholesterol was bad. Like at one point they got together in 1984 and they decided that cholesterol was bad, and the pharmaceutical companies came in and said, okay, well, we're going to fund the lowering of what you think is bad or not, like the level that you think is bad or not. Because at first, LDL cholesterol in United States terms was supposed to be 250 or lower. And then it was 200. And then over the years, it came 150 and then down to 100. And now they want it lower than 100. And so, and all that lowering of the recommendation was funded by pharmaceutical companies. They were pushing for that because they had a drug that lowered cholesterol. So the lower you can make the recommendation, the more drugs you can prescribe. So you have to be an educated consumer and know that this system is set up for profit. Just like any business, it has to profit. And it takes a lot to run those giant hospitals and do those expensive procedures and things like that. Besides the fact that those things aren't working, they're not helping fix Americans and Western society's heart disease, the business still has to sustain itself. And all the people at the top of the business are concerned about is the bottom line. Are we able to keep this hospital running? Which is important for emergency situations. We want a functioning hospital. So it's just a thing. And most of the people in that system are not nefariously there, trying to make or profit off people being sick. But, the CEO of that hospital or the doctors in the hospital are just trying to make money and provide for their family. There are other companies that are influencing that hospital you may see as more nefarious. But the people within the system are mostly just trying to do their job. And if they don't listen, and they're closed-minded, it's because they're stressed about stuff. They got probably issues at home, or they're just stressed because they only got 5 minutes with a patient. Like it's just, this system doesn't, it's not very conducive to change. Right. And so I understand that.
If they'd chosen lowering blood sugar, which they could have done as well. John Yudkin, the British professor, was shouting about sugar at the same time that Ansel Keys was talking about fats. If they'd chosen that, maybe, it's never about one thing anyway, is it? But maybe it would have been a slightly different outcome. But anyway, as we know, it's never about one thing. There's no silver bullet when it comes to any of these chronic diseases. But on that, so what with all your research have you come to conclude in terms of the sort of main underlying mechanisms? If it's not about an accumulation of cholesterol in the arteries, what are and I know it's complex, but if you can sort of summarize, what are the sort of main underlying mechanisms that you believe are going on with coronary artery disease?
So Yeah, it's very multifactorial, and there's some background information that we have to have first. But when you
Yes.
analyze plaque in an artery, like when they do an autopsy, so they take plaque out of someone's artery, um, and they analyze it, it's clotting tissue, fibrotic clotting tissue. It's not an
Okay.
accumulation of cholesterol. Cholesterol does play a role in the formation of that clotting and healing, in the artery, like the
Mhm.
immune reaction that happens, the healing reaction that happens. And there's a little cholesterol present, but it's like 87 to 90% clotting tissue. Is what it is. So you have to ask yourself, what is clotting tissue, or what causes clotting tissue? And so it's the same thing. Like if you cut your finger and a scab forms to stop the bleeding, that's what clotting tissue is.
Mhm.
And so that happens on the lining of the artery when the artery gets damaged. It may
Mhm.
not get cut like your finger did, but it can get damaged because there could be things in it that damage it.
Mhm.
And so to protect the lining of the arteries, we have to not expose ourselves to the things that damage the artery,
Mhm.
and then do things that help build up the protective layer on the artery. And so to me, that's structured water. That is um, it's water, pretty much. We are a large percentage water, and water is a very unique liquid that has properties unlike any other liquid, in that we all know of it in three phases: solid, liquid, gas, steam, water, and ice.
Mhm.
But it also has a fourth phase that's more like a gel.
Mhm.
So between water and ice. And this gel is kind of the consistency of Jello or a raw egg white, that kind of
Mhm.
consistency, that gel.
Yeah.
And this gel forms on biological surfaces. And we are mostly, the water in our body is mostly in this state, which means that it's why I can touch my leg or my arm and I feel like it's a gel. It can move it, but it pops right back, just like a gel. But there's water in the arteries that is liquid water. But that water, when it gets next to the arteries, can structure itself and become this layer of gel next to the artery. And one of the nicknames for exclusion zone or for fourth phase water, it's exclusion zone water because it keeps things away from it. It pushes things away, like nothing can penetrate it. So it protects the artery, right? And so if you look at what's going on today, and what's going on since the epidemic of heart disease really got bad since like the 50s, 60s, um, is we have a lot of things in our environment that
Mhm.
are tearing down the structured water or interfering with its ability to form on the arteries, and we have removed ourselves from things that build it up.
Mhm.
And this is all, mostly coming out of the lab of Dr. Gerald Pollack at University of Washington.
Mhm.
He has studied structured water, and his whole team has been studying water for a long time. And so things that build it up are radiant energy, mostly infrared light, that comes from, you can get it from infrared lamp, but the natural source of it is the sun. The sun is
Mhm.
42% infrared light. Um, and then grounding, putting your feet directly on the earth. This will also build structured water, and there's studies that show this. And so that kind of stuff are things that we are removed from. We are out of touch with the sun. We don't get as much sun. We are out of touch with the earth. We have concrete everywhere. We live indoors, and that's interfering with the ability of this water to structure itself and form. And then you look at the things that have been shown to break down structured water, interfere with its ability to form. Things like glyphosate, which is an herbicide or a toxin found in the herbicide Roundup,
Mhm.
which is used widely on crops, and you can even buy it at your home improvement stores, your weed killer.
Yeah.
It's very pervasive in society today. That's been shown to directly break down structured water. Non-native electromagnetic fields have been
Mhm.
shown in Dr. Pollock's lab to break down structured water about 20%.
Mhm.
So different things like that, just different toxins in general, endotoxemia from poor gut health and poor dental health, or plastics, heavy metals, things like that can interfere with the structured water's ability to form. Anything that we know of as oxidative stress in the body or inflammation. Inflammation is just low body charge. And your body is supposed to hold this net negative charge, and structured water is electronegatively charged. So when it forms, we hold the charge. And so things that interfere with that. So that's what's causing heart disease, is this inability of the body to protect itself because we are in the wrong environments that tear down structured water and don't build it well enough.
So it's for a lot of people probably, oh my goodness, what are you talking about there? You, you haven't mentioned anything to do with diet yet. We'll come to
Mm,
that. But that structured water, the idea of that may surprise people. They may have never even heard of structured water. Let me just give the name Gerald Pollock for
mhm.
people who want to read more about this. It's an absolutely fascinating subject. I think his book is
Yeah.
called The Fourth Phase of Water. So people should go and have a look at that. But yeah, so you're saying that this water forms along sort of the internal walls of our vessels and it protects them. And I think there's also a layer of sort of I think it's called the glycocalyx that lies
Mhm,
along that membrane as well, isn't it? Sort of
mhm,
fine hairs
mhm.
that lie there that sort of probably interacts with that water. And what you're saying is that that whole system provides a very protective barrier against damage to that membrane, but that certain things, like many that you've listed, will undermine the integrity of that barrier, and then the endothelial lining, the lining of the vessels, can become damaged.
Mhm.
And then when they get damaged, it's the body's normal and natural repair mechanism to create clots. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. So if the
Yes.
artery gets damaged, if it gets too damaged and doesn't repair itself, you could
Yes.
the artery could rupture. So the
Yeah.
body does what it has to do, and it uses clotting material and
Mhm.
various other things to patch up that artery and prevent it.
Mm.
So
Mm.
things that break down the structured water, once they break it down, then they damage the glycocalyx, then they damage the lining of the artery. And when it gets to that point, the body is forced to make a decision. Typically, I mean, the arteries have very robust repair mechanisms. One of them, and that repair mechanism is triggered through insulin signaling. Insulin signals for growth and repair. So
Mhm.
when we get people who are insulin resistant or type 2 diabetic, when it's full blown insulin resistance that's been there for a while, we see a heavy correlation to atherosclerosis in those people
Mhm.
because the repair mechanism is also broke down. So not only are they getting damage, and
Mhm.
fluctuating blood sugars can cause damage, but also the repair mechanisms are not working properly because insulin signaling is interfered with, which is the connection to
Mhm.
insulin resistance and atherosclerosis. So now the repair mechanisms are broken down. Not only are they damaged, they can't repair themselves. The body says, we got to do something. So it forms this clotting material, right? And it puts it on there and it kind of patches it up, right? And the more that happens, the bigger and bigger that clotting material can get.
Yeah.
And it happens more frequently in coronary arteries because they're under the most pressure. So if we
Okay.
have a situation that there's a lot of inflammation and things that can damage the artery, they're getting pushed up against the lining of the artery
Mhm.
more because there's more pressure. Especially the left anterior descending artery is under the most pressure of
One that,
any artery
yes.
in the body. So
Yeah. Yeah,
that's, yeah.
yes. So that we're bringing diet in now, which is something we can talk more about. But also, you've mentioned the pressure. So this is why high blood pressure obviously is a risk factor. I mean, there's probably other reasons, but it partly because it will, just through the biomechanical pressure, it will increase the risk of damage to those arteries.
Yeah,
Um,
that and stress. Like when you're stressed, it increases pressure a lot too. So that's why chronic
right.
stress is associated with it as well.
Right, right. And so coming back to the diet then, so you've talked about how insulin resistance is not only can it increase the damage in those vessels, but it will also uh, undermine and break down that barrier of protection. So insulin resistance, probably most people are aware, but talk to me a little bit about how our diet can cause or bring us into a state of insulin resistance.
hmm Well,
Does
it's
that
not
make
just diet that does that.
no, too.
That is
Yes,
one, but
yes.
lots of different things can do that. The big other one is light in our improper light environments, which we can talk about.
Okay.
But
Mm,
as far as insulin resistance from a dietary perspective, it's largely the consumption of these very processed foods.
mm,
So we're talking about sugars, processed sugars, grains, which all grains are very processed, and vegetable oils, which are like corn oil, canola oil, soy oil, safflower oil, those different
mm,
oils that we are pervasive in our food supply.
Mhm.
So those things, the consumption of those things chronically, can lead to metabolic changes that it create what's called insulin resistance, where your body's making insulin, but you're not responding to it.
Mhm.
And so when your body doesn't respond to insulin, then one of the things that insulin does is it brings glucose into cells. So then glucose doesn't go into cells, and we get high blood sugar. But
Mhm.
that's a very in-stage result of insulin. Insulin resistance can be present for many years before it affects blood sugar, which the damage
Mhm.
can be happening for many years before we detect
Mhm.
it in blood sugar, which is why an insulin level on your blood work is very important to take rather than just looking
Mhm.
at blood sugar. So yeah, the consumption of those processed foods over time, and very high carbohydrate foods year round is very problematic in driving insulin resistance, or one of the drivers of insulin resistance. The other issue is blue light. Well, not blue light in itself, but processed blue light. Just like processed food is bad for us,
Okay.
processed
Yeah.
light is also very disruptive to our
Okay.
circadian rhythm and to our
Yeah.
metabolism.
Yeah.
So
What do you
there's
mean by
a
processed light? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so processed light. So the only light that we are supposed to, or our bodies are very familiar with, is the light that we get from the sun. So
Mhm.
that's UV all the way to infrared. And in the middle
Mhm.
of that, there's the colors of light, Roy G. Biv, you know?
Mhm.
And so process light is this modern lighting that they're trying to make be more efficient and less energy consuming. And to do that, they've made it one wavelength, one color of light, which is blue. Um,
Mhm.
and so the LED bulbs and the fluorescent bulbs are very blue. They're emitting blue light. And blue light from the sun, when it comes balanced with other colors of light, is
Mhm.
fine. It's actually been shown to have benefit.
Yeah.
But when we get this processed blue light, it's damaging in and of itself in that it destroys the photoreceptors in your eyes, um, and on skin. But when we get blue light at the wrong time, that's when especially it's problematic to our metabolism, which
Mhm.
metabolism is, or improper metabolism is what leads to insulin resistance. So
Mhm.
our metabolism has a circadian clock to it, and our body
Mhm.
is synced up to the light cycle of the sun, or supposed to be. And so
Mhm.
when the sun goes down, we're not supposed to be getting light. And what we do is we just turn on the lights today, and that tells your body that it's a very different time of day, which
Mhm.
totally negatively influences the
Mhm.
circadian metabolism that we're supposed to have.
Yeah.
And if you just type in disrupted circadian rhythm and metabolic diseases,
Mhm.
thousands of studies will pop up.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's very well established that this
Mhm.
lighting is
Mhm.
having an issue. And it's the other driver of metabolic disease today, which is insulin resistance, this cardiometabolic syndrome that people talk about.
Mhm.
That combined with eating these processed foods is a disaster, for our bodies. And it's just very evolutionarily inconsistent. So
Mhm.
but again, those things are just driving the insulin resistance, that interfere with the artery's ability to repair itself when there is damage. And then, to protect the arteries, we got to do the other things that build the structured water and that kind of stuff. So there's these two kind of aspects of things. Um, and it's this complete picture. When you look at it, you're like, oh, that makes sense.
You talk about oxidative stress in your book as well as another one of the sort of key underlying factors, and all these things link together and overlap, to be honest.
Mhm.
Um, but where does oxidative stress, and what is oxidative stress? Where does that fit in?
Yeah, so oxidative stress and inflammation are kind of different processes, but the same thing. Like inflammation is something
Mhm.
your body creates to promote healing. Oxidative stress is something, that we get an abundance of what are called free radicals in the body, and these free radicals can steal charge from things, and that can lead to tissue damage. And it can steal charge from structured water, in fact.
Mhm.
But the way we can collectively think about these things as oxidative stress and inflammation is things that interfere with your body's ability to maintain its charge. So anybody who's
Mhm.
studied cellular physiology, or just physiology in general, knows that our cells hold a net negative charge. We have this net
Mhm.
negative charge. And so if you think about that on a pH scale, like a pH scale, like if something's more acidic and has more positivity, it's lower pH. If something is more basic, has more alkalinity, more negative charge, it's higher on the scale. And we're about 7.2, 7.4 is what we hold. We hold that net negative charge. And inflammation and oxidative stress are things that steal that charge. So um, there's lots of things that can contribute to that. But when we get this charge that's depleted, one of the first areas that suffers is that structured water on the lining of the arteries, also lining of the gut. These are kind of like the first line of defense for things that we're kind of transporting or filtering out of the body and things. And so the structured water is negatively charged, and it has lots of charge to give off and neutralize these things that cause oxidative stress and inflammation. And so it ends up donating these electrons and getting broken down in the process. So if we're not doing things that increase the net negative charge in our body, like getting sunlight and grounding and moving your body and eating a good diet, things like that, then we end up losing that charge and, falling victim to this oxidative stress and inflammation that damages the body.
I mean, that's a really helpful way to think about it, I think. And in terms of listing all those things that help improve our net negative charge, really, it all comes back to living a more natural lifestyle and
Mhm.
sort of looking at how our ancestors used to live, closer to nature, without so much of this modern lighting, sticking more to the sort of the natural rhythms of the body that coincide with daylight and nighttime, connecting with the earth, actually getting our feet on the earth and fresh air. Trying to minimize our exposure to the bombardment from electromagnetic radiation, eating a more natural diet, a whole food diet, unprocessed. I mean, it all really comes back to a more natural, connected to nature sort of lifestyle, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I'll put that together like in an example for people, so it makes more sense. So
Mm,
for most of the for all the time that life has been on Earth, we've only been exposed to one electromagnetic field, and that's the field of the Earth,
mm,
and maybe other life forms too. But those are native electromagnetic fields. We've been exposed to one um, stimulus of light, which is from the sun. We were in contact with the Earth. We only had the option to eat natural wild food from our environment. And so things have changed very rapidly since then, or since maybe the last 200-300 years, especially. But since the dawn of civilization, things changed. But then with the industrial revolution and the technology revolution, things have changed even more and quickly. And so
mm,
for like all of the time that life has been on Earth, which is, billion years, then humans have been around for 300,000 years or so. We've only been doing these very modern things for a very short amount of time. So you think about it like this. We all know a polar bear's natural environment is the Arctic, right?
mhm.
If I took a polar bear and I put it in Bermuda, it's not going to do very well. It may survive for a while. It may be able to live, maybe even a normal life, but it's going to struggle, right?
Mhm,
Or if you take a tropical fish and you put it in a mountain stream in Canada, it's not going to do very well because the environment has changed too rapidly, too quickly.
mhm,
Again, it
mhm,
may survive for a while unhealthily, and that's what's happening in humans. We have changed
mhm,
our environment too much. We've
mhm,
got these unnatural stimuli that are affecting us, and it's not killing us right away, but
mhm,
it's making our quality of life. It's hard
mhm,
for our bodies to maintain this
mhm,
health that is given to us by a natural environment, by what our bodies are used to being exposed to, which all life is used to being exposed to for as long as life has been here.
mhm,
And you have to think about it that way. It doesn't mean that we have to go live out in the woods, and that's the only solution. It means that we can make changes within our modern lifestyle that bring us a little bit closer to that.
mhm.
And when we do that, it gives our bodies the right signals and we stop having disease, one of them being heart disease.
Mm. I mean, it sounds like it's in some ways almost impossible to sort of downplay some of those stimuli, as you say, that we are exposed to now as part of our modern life. I mean, how do we minimize our exposure to electromagnetic radiation if we, are now living in a sea of 5G and Wi-Fi, all the rest of it? How do we connect to the earth other than in the summer when we can maybe walk around the garden? But it can sound quite tricky when you start to dig down into all these things that are present in our modern lifestyle and how we can start to rebalance that. But you know, it is possible. It just it does involve quite a lot of thinking about, and this isn't simply about changing the diet, although that's an important part of it. We are talking, like I said right at the beginning, about quite a broad spectrum of things that we need to consider with our lifestyle, whether it is the light, our circadian rhythms, whether it is our diet, our movement. Um, I mean, you talk about exercise and movement in your book, but again, I think that a lot of people are probably going about their sort of exercise in a slightly, let's say, imbalanced way. What would you say about how we should be moving in order to support our cardiovascular system?
Yeah. Well, just to comment on one thing that you said, like it is very multifactorial, all these things. It's the idea that one thing is the cause of a whole disease process doesn't make sense, which is why the theory that cholesterol is driving a disease process, one biomolecule, doesn't make sense. We're very complex biological ecosystems, and it's very multifactorial. If you look at all the changes, it makes sense. Yes, and I think that the mainstream thinking about heart disease and the ways to prevent it is diet and exercise, and yes, those things are important, but there is much more that we should look at. And I think that there's been a bit of a misunderstanding about what the best form of exercise is for health in general, but cardiovascular health. So like endurance exercise or we think of as cardio, it's even labeled cardio, like it's beneficial for your heart. Some of that is needed, but excessive amounts of it are not good for us, in my opinion. So like marathoning, ultra marathoning, or even just too many miles in an aerobic state, I think can be harmful. There's studies that show that people who are marathoners and ultra runners and things like that, that at the end of their life, they have more atherosclerosis and they have more scarring in the tissue of their hearts. There's evidence of people, having acute heart attacks running marathons. But again, there's people who don't have heart attacks running marathons, or
Of course.
they don't have,
You,
not running a marathon, they have a heart attack. So yeah, but I think that the point is that I'm never going to take that type of exercise away from somebody if they enjoy it or it's their part of their job or something like that. But for the average person looking to exercise more, it's way more beneficial to build muscle than it is to do this endurance cardio. I mean, your cardio could just be going for walks, like, some decent sized walks and maybe up some hills and things like that. You don't need to run or cycle aggressively for miles at a time. And there's actually way more benefit to building muscle than there is to doing this traditional cardio. So like I like to go hiking or go for walks. Like that's my cardio, so to speak. And I don't do it every day. I do it, hopefully twice a week or something like that. But I think that this excessive cardio and that the idea that cardio is what gives you a healthier heart is inaccurate, and building muscle is way more important. I mean, muscle is the organ of longevity. The more muscle you maintain as you age, the longer you will live. And that's what all the research shows, maintaining that muscle mass. So you need to eat adequate protein, and you need to challenge that muscle with resistance exercise, and then go for walks and be generally moving around during the day.
So it is in a way, a more gentle approach. And I think that so many of us feel like we have to push ourselves in all sorts of different ways. But if we are trying to get fit and healthy, one of the ways that we mistakenly sometimes think we should do that is by counteracting all the sitting that we do for 90% of the time, by then going to the gym and pushing ourselves to our absolute limits, which really isn't an optimal way of getting our body moving. And I wonder if your own exercise regime has changed, because am I right in thinking that you were working out the morning of your heart attack? Do you feel you were pushing yourself a bit far that day, and that maybe
in that day, in that situation that I was in? Yes. So I had been going through some stressful things. I mean, COVID was happening, and there were things in the world happening that I didn't like seeing. And for some reason, I let it get to me, which typically I wouldn't. I would ignore the news and I would ignore things, and there was just things happening that I didn't agree with, and I was letting it get to me. Um, there was that. And then I also was dealing with some relationship things at the time. And
Mhm.
then a day and a half before my heart attack, I got very distressful news about a close family member.
Right.
And so I got that news Sunday night, went through Monday kind of through in a haze because it was the inability for anybody in my family or me to do anything for this person. We were just sitting around hoping that it was going to be okay.
Mm.
And so that was very stressful. And then I woke up Tuesday morning, still in this state of stress, and I did my usual workout that I would usually do. And it was a very intense, like sprint hit interval training type workout, which I'm not
Mhm.
opposed to. But in that situation where I was, I should
Yeah.
not have tried to do that. And I think
Yeah.
that it was the straw that broke the camel's back, especially for me, because there's evidence that type 1 diabetics in a state of stress have less ability to cope with the stress of exercise.
Okay. Yeah.
Very distinct evidence that the nervous system is a bit imbalanced.
Mm.
So yeah, and that's all stuff that's in hindsight, but I think that that could be what triggered it.
Mm.
Not that
Mm.
I'm saying that I think that intense kind of to failure exercise is good, as long as it's done in a reasonable amount of effort and like exhaustion,
Yeah. Yeah.
but you just got to be careful about when you do it. If you
Yeah.
are really stressed or going through a really stressful time in your life or a stressful event
Yeah.
happened, like give your body a break,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
otherwise these things could happen. And so just so people know, like exercise and stress increase clotting factors tremendously, because typically evolutionarily, if you were stressed and moving your body, you're probably trying to get away from something that's trying to kill you,
Mhm.
something you're being hunted by. And so
Yeah.
there's a likelihood that you may get injured. And so your body's increasing clotting factors,
Mhm.
so that if you do get injured, it's ready to stop that bleeding, so that it increases your risk of survival. However, this day and age, we stay stressed and doing that type of inflammatory thing in the wrong time, I
Mhm.
think kind of did me in. And there's lots of different things that I could think that may have contributed to it. It was probably this perfect storm that just happened. But it also goes to show that this theory of cholesterol, which mine was fine, and um, my metabolic health was fine, and there's no insulin resistance, and there was no calcification, there was nothing in my arteries, and it still happened,
Mhm.
right? So there's other things that Western medicine is missing,
Mhm.
but yeah, that's
Um, and you do talk about in your book that stress was probably quite a big factor for you, just because you had had some chronic stress for a while, and then you had that intense period just a couple of days before finding out about your family member that sort of sat on top of the chronic stress that you've been dealing with, and was maybe, like you say, the straw that broke the camel's back. I mean, do you feel, because I would say I certainly do, that stress is one of the biggest factors in terms of heart attacks? And I think, the research probably suggests that's the case. Um, do you feel that, first of all? And also, you've talked about some of the mechanisms there as to how stress ties into the whole picture that you've been describing. Maybe you could just sort of go into a bit more detail around what are the mechanisms that underlie the whole link with stress and heart
yeah.
disease and heart attacks.
Well, one of them I discussed was that increases, like an acute stress increases clotting factors in the blood.
Mhm.
So it prepares the body to clot, which clotting is what is the end result of these events, whether it's atherosclerosis forming or heart attack or stroke or
Yeah,
whatever
yeah, yeah.
clotting happens. So that's one of them. But another one is uh, like when we get a chronic stress. And so, you know, what is that? What does that mean? Like, for something to stress you out, it has to be something that affects you to the past the point of what your emotional capabilities are to handle that thing. So that means it's different for everybody. What stresses you out is
Mhm.
different for everyone because everyone's got a different capacity based on their life and past traumas and things like that. But if it exceeds that capacity for you to handle it, our body starts to go and have this more what's called sympathetic response, where sympathetic response is what your body does to prepare for battle, pretty much, to fight off this stress and return to homeostasis. And if we start to get this chronically, then our body can start to perpetually be in this state of more sympathetic. But it's never like we're in sympathetic or in parasympathetic, which is the non-stress response. They're always supposed to balance each other. So like if sympathetic surges because we have a stress, that tells your body to do certain things to prepare for that stress, but it's always balanced by parasympathetic, so that we get like this kind of, it's like a braking system, like, all right, handle the stress, but then come back, kind of thing. And unfortunately, if we think our way into stress responses more often, because we're the only species with a brain big enough to do that, to cognitively think about that and think about things, and nothing stressful could be happening to us, but we see it happen to someone else, or we see something across the world happening and we take on that stress, then we can think our way into the stress response. That happens chronically, then the ability of that system to break itself gets inhibited, right? And so then we have this stressful thing that happens with no non-stress signal trying to balance it out, and that can send the body down into this cycle of or this cascade of events that causes issues. So like if you think about it, if you're in a state of stress, you're trying to get away from a threat. You're not thinking about sleeping. You're not thinking about eating. You're not thinking about having sex. You're not thinking about anything. And so the things we see with chronic stress can be insomnia or digestive issues or sexual dysfunction or detoxification issues, like these different things that people can see when we have this chronic stress. And it also chronically elevates clotting factors in the blood. So when we talk about heart disease and the formation of atherosclerosis, which is clotting tissue, then that's more likely to happen, as well as acute clots and things like that that can block whole arteries and things, and strokes and heart attacks and things like that.
So we've always been exposed to stress. It's we're designed to cope with acute stresses now and again. And in fact, it's probably a good thing. It helps us to grow. It stimulates, it's what has pushed evolution forward. So, stressful events, we're never going to be able to avoid them, and we wouldn't want to. However, chronic stress is the big problem. And like you say, we are unique in terms of our species being able to think our way into that stress response. What do you think are some of the best ways, because we can't avoid challenges in life, that's never going to be possible, what do you think are some of the best ways to handle life challenges and to sort of make sure that we can bring our body into the relaxation response on a regular basis? What are some of the techniques and the tools that you recommend particularly?
Yeah. So I think that the most important thing here is, like you said, we're going to go through stresses. Things are going to happen in life, especially modern life. We have these kind of unnatural stresses. And there are lots of different techniques and things, but I think that the main thing is that even if you feel like you're chronically stressed and then the occasional acute stress happens, the more that you have created a life that your body can fall back on, the better able you're going to be able to cope with that. And what does that mean? That means the more optimized your circadian rhythm is, the more synced up you are to the day-night cycle, the more grounding you do, the more gratitude practice you do, the more positive, social, loving relationships you surround yourself with, like real, authentic relationships rather than more superficial ones. Or like the more you make your life those things, then even if you're working at this high stress job or you're struggling with money and everything, then doing those things is giving your body this cushion, this safety net to fall back on. And that's very reassuring to us when we do that. But if you think about it, then if we have that, even if we have an acute stress, we go out and we do those things, right? So rather than me falling back on those things, I had this acute stress and I went out and tried to do this hard thing. And I probably shouldn't have done that, right? I probably should have sought support, talked to somebody, or gotten sunlight or grounded or something like that. And I didn't do that. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of important to think about that. I mean, and then you think about it too, like if you don't do those things and you're surrounded by unnatural light and you're eating unprocessed food and you're eating and you're surrounded by Wi-Fi all the time and you don't ever try and mitigate those signals and you're kind of isolated, you don't have many true good social relationships or people to rely on, and then you also have this really stressful job that you hate, and then you go through a stressful event, you're probably not going to handle that very well. Your body's not going to be able to cope with that. And I think that's somewhat of a situation that I got to, even though I was doing a lot of healthy behaviors. I was moving my body a lot and I was eating a very good whole foods diet. But I was missing a lot of the other things. And so this stress happened and my body wasn't able to cope with it. And luckily for me, it was something I survived, still not a good thing to happen, but I've survived and lived to tell the tale. But it's like, you have to think of things that way, because it's not necessarily, lots of times I think people think, okay, well, I have this stress problem, or they measure their heart rate variability and they're like, okay, I have a problem with stress. Okay, what can I add to make that level go down? And that's important. And we just talked about those things to help cushion you, but it's what else can you remove? Can you remove the unnatural light? Can you remove the electromagnetic fields, remove the processed foods, all those things that are going to help your body be able to respond to that more. And then I also think it's useful to think about your perception of stress, like the things that you are perceiving in your mind as stressful. How stressful are they really? Like, what would happen if the worst thing happened? Like, play that out in your head and be like, oh, well, actually it would be okay. It may suck for a while, but in the end it would be okay. And your body gets through it, and so just things like that. And then also stresses that seem to be the worst for our health are stresses that make you feel out of control or like you're in an unpredictable situation, so those are the types of stresses that if you feel you can't control that, then to try and remove those from your life if you can. So, yeah.
So what you've been talking about there is a very holistic approach, and sort of going back to where I started, really, my 7 elements of healing that I talk about. We've covered most of those. So nutrition, whole foods, natural diet, something that regulates our blood glucose as much as possible, stay away from those processed fats in particular. We haven't really talked about the animal versus plant foods, but I know you're an advocate of including animal foods in the diet. So, people can read more about that in the book. So that's nutrition. We've talked about toxicity in a bit of touched on it anyway. You talked about pesticides and there are many other toxins. You briefly mentioned dental toxins, which I know is quite a big issue when it comes to heart disease. Again, there's more in the book on that. So we talked about physical activity, and yes, of course it's important, but we have to be mindful of what other things are going on in our lives and sort of tailor what exercise we're doing accordingly, and not always push ourselves to the absolute limit. We've talked about rest and relaxation and the importance of tying our sleep in with our the daylight and nighttime, and also looking after ourselves in terms of getting enough relaxation and minimizing our stress, even though we can't avoid it completely. We have talked about the energetic side of things, bioenergetic balance, and I know you're a real fan of grounding, which you've mentioned several times, and exposure to sunlight. So long we've been told that too much sunlight is bad, but actually sunlight, and the research, as I know you'll understand, really supports the benefits of sunlight, not just for vitamin D, but the light itself is so important for us, and partly, as you say, because of the way it helps to structure our water. We talked about emotional health. You've touched on it there in terms of talking about isolation, and we know loneliness is a problem for chronic diseases and heart disease. The one thing that we maybe haven't touched on, and maybe just to finish, I'll just have a question for you. One of the things in my 7 elements is deep connection, or you could call this spiritual connection. I just wonder whether that aspect of things has come into it at all for you. And when I talk about spirituality, I don't necessarily mean a religious faith or even what you'd conventionally think about in terms of a spiritual faith. It might just be a connection to life force, to nature, to animals, to music, to art. Is there anything that for you was important on that sort of deeper connecting level?
Yeah, I think that connection is super important, and you can see it at a cellular level, and you
Mm,
can apply it all the way up to individual life connecting with other life level. So cells, when they are synced up and able to communicate and connected to one another, we get what's called coherence,
mm,
which is what the heart is measuring. The heart is got a giant electromagnetic field that's it's sensing all that coherence and this communication that's happening. And when cells feel isolated, where they're unable to communicate, they literally act like they're under attack.
mm,
This is what research has shown.
mm,
And so what do we can see that at a human level. We can see that humans who feel isolated or they've had trauma and trained their brain to feel certain ways or wired in certain ways, that they can literally lash out like they're under attack when they get confronted with negative emotion. Whether it's the person they're lashing out at's fault or not, they do that. And so we see that at a cellular level, we can see that at a human level. And most of this all comes down to an inability to connect, right? Cells to connect to other cells, and humans feeling like they are isolated, they are unable to connect, right? And so, what connects humans? Well, you can feel like a personal connection to somebody, or you can tap into, you know, the field, so to speak, that
mm,
allows us to electromagnetically connect. And there's lots of evidence that this medium through which connection happens does exist, just like waves have a medium through which they travel, which is water, and radio waves travel through air. Like there is a medium through which these electromagnetic signals that humans give off and all life gives off connect with each other. And that feeling of belonging and feeling like you're um you know I mean feeling like you're connected to others in a certain way. People have attributed this to many different things throughout humanity, through many different religions and spiritualities. We've called it prana, we've called it God, we've called it ether, we've called it, so many different things that we attribute this ability to connect. People can call it love or just human connection or nature, whatever. And it's that sense of being connected to something bigger than yourself. Um, and to me, it's just all life having a medium through which it can connect to. And so, and you can see the difference between somebody who feels alone in a crowded room, like
mm,
they're literally right next to other people, just like cells are literally right next to another cell, but they can't sense them, they can't feel them, they feel disconnected. And this can develop from past traumas and life experience, and they feel isolated. And a cell can get that way too, and it starts to lash out and feel scared, right? And so reestablishing this connection could start with a lot of different things.
mm,
It could start with, you know, I think that's what all religions from an individual level are, trying to do. I think that they've been abused and historically,
yeah.
but from an individual level, that's what they're trying to do: establish connection between humans and doing good and things like that. But there are
Mm,
many different spiritualities and things that can do that.
mm,
But it also could involve, work on the body and
mm,
work on its ability to improve connection between itself and create that coherence, which could be body work. It could be, um, maybe some psychological work that involves the body too. I think that's very important. We can't just think about things from the mind perspective. We have to think
mm,
about the mind and body,
mm,
um, all those different things. But all that's incredibly important, because if your body is incoherent and it can't communicate with itself, it can't communicate with other things, then you've lost your connection, or your ability to connect, and you feel isolated, and that creates a very stressful situation. So it's incredibly important to feel connected. And that can start with just finding a group of people that are into the same thing you are. I mean, there's lots of different things that are missing within our modern lives that are interfering with this connection.
mm. And our heart having the strongest electromagnetic field of all our organs, it probably is the part of us that connects more than any other. So that ties right back into, you know, looking after the heart on a physical
Yeah.
level, but also on an energetic level too. You did say, and this is my final question now, you did say at some point in your book that once you came home from the hospital, you felt a little bit scared of your heart, or you felt perhaps a little bit disconnected from it. Your relationship with your heart had been damaged a little bit. I'm sure you've rebuilt that now, and in fact, I think you say you have. But do you feel you've got a good relationship with your heart?
Yeah, I guess the word I would use is betrayed a little.
Yes.
Um, or maybe it felt betrayed by me,
Yeah.
so to speak,
Yeah.
because I was trying to learn all these ways to take care of it, wasn't practicing a lot of them, or let myself get caught up in things, and my heart suffered from it. So it was like this relationship I had to repair a little bit, um, not just physically, but emotionally too. And I definitely when I feel a stress today, I feel it in my heart. That's
Mm.
where I feel stress, and I think that that's an important thing for people to realize is that, especially if there's been a past trauma or something in their life, even if they didn't remember it because they were a child or something, when you feel stress, stop feeling it in your mind
Mm.
and start to try and feel where you feel it in your body,
Mm.
because that tells you where that trauma may be stored.
Mm.
And then it also helps you understand that you have to not just feel it with that one part of your body, because you have a whole body that can
Mm.
help you. It's kind of like going back to that, to like coherence, and like if your whole body is synced up and communicating like it's supposed to be, you can handle that stress because your whole body's participating.
Mm.
Whereas if you encounter that stress and you try and battle it with just one organ,
Mm.
that one organ is not going to win, right? Or that
Mm.
one body part or something like that. And that's what can happen when we get trauma stored somewhere, is we start to attack stresses with one
Mm.
organ, the one that we're paying attention to. And so rather than do that, when you're feeling that stress, try and, it's really crazy actually, like when you mentally take the stress away from that organ and you try and feel it with your whole body, like you let the whole team come and support
Mm.
everything,
Mm.
and there's a really good book called, The Practice of Embodying Emotions, that talks about this
Okay.
extensively.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's basically how we need to use our whole system, because we're all stronger like with a whole system
Mm.
to
Mm.
attack these stresses. And unfortunately, traumas and things train us to do it with one spot, and
Mm.
so
Mm.
using the whole
Mm.
body is really beneficial. So
Yeah.
so yeah, I think that part of that repair for me was learning to not feel things so much with just one part of the body, or just, and you have to be aware, you have to consciously stop and be like, okay,
Yeah.
where am I feeling this right now?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then start to try and draw it away from that and use the
Mm.
rest of your body too. And so that's one way I repaired things, I guess.
Yeah. Good. Well, I'm glad you did repair things on
Mhm.
many levels. And I have to say, this has been a great conversation. I didn't think we'd perhaps manage to cover the whole spectrum, but we did. But there's so much more for people to have a look at. Let me show your book again, because as I said earlier, this is my #1 book to recommend because it covers so many things. Um, thank you so much for your time, Stephen. Where can people find out more about you? Because I know not only your book, but you also offer a service of consultations for people. So for people who want to improve their heart health, or maybe other aspects of health, then you offer coaching. Do you want to just say a little bit about that and where people can connect with you?
Yeah, my website is resourceyourhealth.com, and my health consulting is on there. My books are on there. And I have like recommended products and things on there as well. And then I'm on Instagram and Facebook and X, as it's called now. It's just Dr. Stephen Hussey, Dr. Stephen Hussey. And I'm always posting like information that hopefully helps people about things that I'm finding or thinking about
Mm.
on there, so people can get that. But yeah, those are the main places. My books on Amazon. If people don't want to use Amazon, they can go to the publisher's website, which is Chelsea Green, and it's there as well. But yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. It's been a fascinating conversation, and you've given us loads to think about, and I really appreciate it. So thank you so much again, Stephen.
Yes,
And
thank you.
thank you for joining, everyone, and I look forward to connecting with you again soon. Take care.